Today, we're diving into a tale of wilderness, survival, and robots? That and more on today's episode of The Real Review, so stay tuned. Welcome to The Real Review, sponsored by Parametric Studios, where you get some of the latest happenings, real thoughts, and real perspectives in the world of film and television. Today, we're talking about The Wild Robot. The synopsis for this film is, after a shipwreck, an intelligent robot called Roz is stranded on an uninhabited island. To survive the harsh environment, Roz bonds with the island's animals and cares for an orphaned baby goose. The combined director and writer for this film is Chris Sanders. He's somebody that has directed a couple of really big films in the past you might recognize. He's the director of Lilo and Stitch. He is also the director of How to Train Your Dragon. It stars a number of voice actors, which I won't cover all of, but some of the key ones are Lupita Nyong'o as Roz, who is sort of the main robot of the film. You have Pedro Pascal as Finks, who is a fox within the film. You have Kit Connor, who is Bright Bill. He is the baby duckling or duck that you kind of see throughout the course of the film. There's also Bill Nighy as Longneck, who's a bit of a mentor duck character. It also has Catherine O'Hara, who plays Pinktail. She is a mother possum. And then Stephanie Hsu as Vontra, who is in a way sort of the main antagonist of the film. Now, I went into this film very unexpectant of what I was about to encounter. One of the primary reasons for that is I had not seen a ton of marketing, a ton of promos for that. Some of it might just be based upon the fact that this film is very clearly targeting a young age demographic. That said, I received a free screening pass for this film, not a special one for reviewers, but just one that they had sent out to the general public. And I had a friend that I thought would want to go see this with me, so I invited him and we went. And overall, because of the fact that I had really no expectations for what was going to come of this film, even of who the writer or director was, trying to be just kind of a complete blank slate for the film, I would say I was happily surprised. First and foremost, starting at the top of this film, it's a story that's probably most closely aligned to what you would see from maybe a Pixar film. Something on the lines of, The Good Dinosaur, or Up, something where it is existing kind of in our world, but it's also in a place or a time that exists very far from how our modern society actually is. Now, there was a obvious connection to kind of where we're headed. A lot of that ties into, obviously, advances that we have with things like robots and AI, but this is sort of an alternate universe or a potential universe for where we could go into the future. And again, not really having any expectations for what was going to come from the film other than it was a story about a robot in the wilderness, probably geared towards a young age demographic just due to the rating of the film being a PG film. I figured I would be in for something that was probably a little bit goofy, probably a little bit fast-paced, really in-your-face, kind of obvious jokes. That's tends to be a lot of what I see out of studios outside of Pixar when it comes to kid films. They can be a little bit more slow in their pacing or a little bit more adult in some of the ways that they structure their stories. And I was pleasantly surprised overall. This film is a lot more grounded and a lot more intense in the sense of having a strong theme and a strong set of characters in it. One thing that is very clear is they were definitely not aiming to only make this something that appealed to or was enjoyable for children audiences. This film is actually based on a series of books. It's a trilogy of books right now. It's The Wild Robot, The Wild Robot Escapes, and The Wild Robot Protects. And I think this film is really set primarily within the first book's story. So because of that, because of its grounding in an actual book, it did feel like a lot of the time there was sort of flowing throughout a really strong sense of the theme and the tone and the overall impression of what the story was trying to give to you. Now, it was at times very fast-paced, but I think a lot of that was an attempt to keep the runtime short and an attempt to make sure that young kids that are probably watching this film don't feel too bored by it. But the actual sense of where the story goes and what is kind of drawn out from the characters is a lot of real timeless, heartfelt, enjoyable, and relatable content. I think my overall feeling from the story when I left it was that it was a very simple story. There's kind of just more or less a plot that revolves around Roz interacting with a lot of animals on this island and sort of trying to complete her mission and trying to figure out basically what her purpose is. mixed with Bright Bill and Fink. And the cool thing about this is I think what they did is they mixed the theme, that idea of kind of who am I, why do I exist, what am I here for? That was kind of filled in with all the side characters and the side stories. Now, to me personally, I think to really have elevated this story to a higher level, it would have been nice if they had incorporated a few characters' stories that kind of branched it a little farther from just that simple element of that, why am I here? Or, am I simply just living my life based upon my programming or based upon how I'm trained to act? Or am I going to do what I feel like I should be doing? And it's a very good lesson to teach kids. I think it's a very good thing for children to see portrayed in cinema. It was a very inspirational type movie. There were definitely times where I felt personally touched, personally impacted. There were times where it was a bit of an emotional roller coaster. I don't want to say that I, broke down into tears while I was in the theater or anything, but it definitely had a couple of those moments, where you get that kind of like gut sadness or that gut, a little bit of bittersweetness deep down. And that's something that a lot of kids' films these days don't manage to accomplish. And it's something that a lot of films in general don't manage to elicit, at least from me, which is a type of emotional response where I'm able to take myself out of just what I'm seeing on screen and go, hey, that relates to me and connects to me in a very interesting way. So there's not much more that I can say without spoiling different elements of the story. And I'm doing this as a spoiler-free review. But what I would also add is, there was very good humor sort of throughout the film. There was a few really good setups and payoffs of, kind of knowing, hey, this is more than likely where things are going to go. And there was a few little subtle twists of expectations of what might actually happen and then what ended up really happening. I would say as far as like the heights of overall suspense or scariness or emotion, it never really got too far, never felt too extreme where, if you're a young kid, this is going to devastate you. But it definitely got to a place where it felt like, hey, I'm probably going to be pretty emotionally impacted by this film. So that's something to be aware of. If you're an adult and you like animated films, like Pixar films, you'll probably enjoy this and you'll probably get something out of it. If you're a really young kid, there are definitely some things that might, fly over your head a little bit, but I think there's enough there to latch onto with, the visuals and the cool world building and the action and the set pieces and the humor and sort of the overall speed of the editing and the pacing that you're going to enjoy it. I will say with the story kind of right around the middle portion, it did sort of feel slow at times. There was a little bit of a sense of, okay, well, I kind of know where this is going to go, and I'm sort of just waiting for that to happen. I think one thing that would have elevated that particular part of the story to be a little bit more enjoyable for me would have been if they had incorporated the main villain of this film earlier on. There's a kind of a few mean characters or not so nice animals that get brought into the mix at different times, but that is kind of all treated more as like, hey, this is a bit of a misunderstanding. There is one character, again, played by Stephanie Kazoo, her name is Vantra in the film. It's sort of an AI robot that is, if anything, the main villain of the actual movie. Her role doesn't actually start off until the far into the second half of the film. And I think personally that if that had been added in earlier, there would have been higher stakes. There would have been a sense of, hey, there's a bit of a ticking time bomb that's about to go off when all these characters sort of collide with each other. And that would have made things a little bit more interesting just as an adult viewer. Again, for a child, I think the focus on the theme, the focus on your purpose and growing and being strong and finding strength through, your friends and your family and those you surround yourself with. I think that will be enough to latch onto for a young audience member. But again, just as an adult viewing this, there would have been a lot more if the stakes had been higher with sort of a antagonistic character playing a bigger role in the film. That said, overall, I gave the film an 87, which is a B plus for its story. Next, we're going to move into the voice acting. I think for the most part, everybody that was cast in this film did an excellent job with their voice acting. There was not a lot of complaints that I had overall when it came to their vocalization or their ability to make you relate and understand the characters, what the characters, I should say, were going through and experiencing at the time. A couple standouts that I will say without, going into some of the negatives, were again, Catherine O'Hara. She just nails it, pretty much everything she does. I thought she did an amazing job as the mother possum in this film called Pinktail. I thought also Roz Lapita did a good job with the overall robotic sense that she was going for with the character. And I think it's difficult because there's a very very, very fine line there where you're going for a robot, which is an artificial, part of the character, and then you're going for a human, which is an artificial, part of the character. And I think it's difficult because there's a very fine line there where you're going for a robot, which is an artificial, part of the character, and then you're going for a human, which is an artificial, part of the character. voice while also going for something that is connectable, relatable, and also can have a little bit of emotion. In the later parts of the film, she kind of progresses as a character and her voice becomes something that's much more relatable and connectable. Whereas at the beginning, she did a very good job of making it feel like it was a bit disconnected. So I thought that was an overall really good transitional job with the voice acting. I don't know if that was intentional or not. But overall, yeah, I thought it was very good. That said, I think one minor gripe, if you will, is that it did feel like at times the voice acting embraced a little bit more of the individual voice actor or character, the real person that was doing the voice acting, than I myself might enjoy in seeing a story. And what I mean by that is, I think with the voice acting, your job is not to see the actor. Your job when you're hearing their voice as the character, your job is to see the character that's being portrayed on screen and going, okay, that is that character, even though I know it's fake. These are computer graphics. These aren't real people. If you're a good voice actor, you're going to make me disconnect from that and go, okay, that isn't this person that I know from this project or that person that I know from that project. You're going to go, okay, that is that character. And there was some good with that and there was some bad with it. I think there was definitely a few characters, and I'm not going to specifically pick on anybody right now, but there was specifically a few characters that it felt like, okay, I can see you're doing this character, but it also kind of feels like your version of that character. And, maybe that's a personal thing. Maybe that's an overly large knowledge of who this voice actor is outside of this film. But I think, again, that was a bit of a disservice sometimes to some of these characters and didn't allow me to connect in with the characters and the voice acting as well as I might have been able to otherwise. I still overall gave it a very high rating. I gave it an 88, which is a B plus. So I would say overall, very positive, very good with the voice acting. I think I would have just liked to see them maybe lean on a few less recognizable voices. For the next section, I'm going to cover sort of three big chunks together because I think they're very well wrapped into one another due to this being an animated film, which is the cinematography, the editing, and the visual effects or the computer graphics. Overall, I think this absolutely matches a lot of what we've seen done by modern studios. And there was nothing about the visual effects that I thought were poorly constructed or poorly shot. Did I feel like this advances, computer graphics in any meaningful way and it's like a jump forward with the technology? No, but I also think this wasn't necessarily a film that needed that. I think it was telling a very specific story. It's one that has shown and been done in a lot of other types of films with nature and robots and animals. And so the big thing there is just not wanting them to be so bad to me that it takes me out of the film. And so I think the CG was great for that. I think the editing was a little bit of a detractor at times. There was a bit of a pacing feel, which might not have been specifically chosen by the editor. It might have been more of a director-producer decision. But there was a little bit of a pacing with the editing at times where it felt like things were just kind of so just go, 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 especially at the very beginning, where it felt like we missed some of the tone or we missed some of a connection to what's happening in the moment. And I think that would have been my one gripe, is that in the beginning of the film, it felt like the pacing was so quick and so rapid fire that they could have just slowed things a tiny bit more. They could have shown a little bit of progression of Roz living in this, unknown world. Whereas in the middle, I felt like that needed a bit more of a speed, that needed a bit more of a quick kind of rapid fire pacing. And so the editing was good. I don't think there was anything awfully done. A lot of this is, the shots are being put together by the VFX team and they're kind of just being composited in by the editor. So there isn't just a lot of control necessarily the editor is going to have on what's going to end up in the frame. And that does tie into the cinematography. I felt like the cinematography was very good in this film. Specifically, what I'm talking about as well with cinematography is the actual composition of what's being put in the frame. When we talk about things like, is it a wide shot? Is it a close-up shot? Are there foreground elements, background elements? What's in focus in the actual shot? I felt like the film did a good job with the overall cinematography. There was nothing, again, that drew me out of the film. And there was a couple, foreshadowing elements that were framed very nicely to kind of tie into, hey, what's happening here? The one thing I guess I wish they had maybe focused on a little bit more was kind of these more pulling you into the world type shots, or at least a more clever usage of the elements within a scene. There was times where things would just kind of be there and exist there. And I think one of the things that I've seen done so amazingly well with a lot of Pixar films is the use of focus and focus pulling. This film was one of those ones where it was pretty much everything was in focus a huge chunk of the time. And obviously, there are some things, background elements or foreground elements that they did an effective job with some of the focus. But this one pretty much was one of those films where it showed you exactly what they wanted you to see. And I think I like sometimes my cinematography to be a bit more of like, hey, we're going into this element, we're going into this portrayal of something in a way that's unexpected or not necessarily so flagged for what you're going to get from it. It was good. It was well done cinematography, well done visual effects, with the exception of the editing, like I said in the beginning, being a bit too fast and a bit too slow in the middle. I felt like overall it landed, the duck landed very well, the plane landed very well by the end of the film, and it overall came together in a very nice way. So overall, I gave the cinematography, VFX, and editing an 84, which is a B. Last but not least, one other important element to any animated film, I mean, any film in general, but especially with animated films like this one, is the music. There's a lot of portions of this film where there's not a ton of talking, there's not a ton of conversations happening between the different characters. So you really need to have the music be strong and impactful in order to tell you as a viewer what it is that's really coming from the scene. For the most part, Chris Bowers, who did the music for this, did the composing, did an excellent job with the score. The music felt impactful, it felt important, it felt like it was aiding me in getting into the overall emotion of the moment and drawing me in further to those. There was times where there was a sense of foreboding and fear, and they did a really good job of, sort of tying that into the soundtrack. There was times where it was wonder and amazement when, revealing the world, and that was done very well. And then there was times where it was more sad and somber. The music did also a very good job of allowing the weightiness of those moments to linger and feel impactful to me. And so I would say overall, very good job by Chris Bowers on the soundtrack for this. The only gripe I would have, there's certain soundtracks like The Incredibles or even Up, where the moment you hear those, they're going to elicit an emotion. And it's not just based upon the instruments that they're using, but it's based upon the note structure, the chords, the progression of the sound throughout the course of the film. And I feel like as great as the music was for this film, there's nothing that when I left, I'm like, now that's going to be stuck in my head for years. And when I hear that song, or if I hear that song again out in the public, I'm going to immediately know, okay, that's The Wild Robot. And so I think that kept this from being elevated to sort of a top tier soundtrack for me. But again, it did an excellent job of getting across the emotions that it needed to within the film. And if nothing else, heightened those emotions to a higher level. And so overall, I gave the music for this film an 89, which is a B+. All this said, taking into account the story, the voice acting, the VFX, cinematography, and editing, as well as the music, that lands my review at an 87 overall, which is a B+. Again, going into this film, not knowing anything about it, my expectations for it were completely open. And I think overall, it was a positive experience that left me very satisfied to have been able to enjoy the film. It's one of those films that I would have paid, even if I hadn't gotten the option to see it at a screening, I would have absolutely paid for a ticket. And it's one of those films that, as long as your kids aren't given to extreme levels of, depression or being sad from films, I would absolutely say if you're a parent, it's a great film to take your kids to. There's nothing about this film that I think 99% of people in the world are going to find objectionable. It's really a film that leaves you with a deep sense of what life can be about and the important elements of family and purpose while you're living the life that you've got before you. And so I would definitely suggest, if you have an opportunity to go see this film. It's been out in theaters for a little while now, and it's done pretty well overall. It's definitely made back its production budget, and I would expect, if that continues on and it does well outside of theaters when it moves on to the different streaming platforms, we probably will see a sequel. As I mentioned before, there's 3 different books within the series, and I personally would be excited to see where this story goes. I was left impacted by it. I was left impacted by the characters, and I definitely think you will be too if you get a chance to see it. So with that being said, I'd love to know your thoughts and perspectives on The Wild Robot as well. So if you want to drop us an email, let us know what you thought about it. You can. Our email is realreviewmedia@gmail.com. Again, let us know what you thought. If it was a, A+ film for you, if it was a F-, type film for you, let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts and perspectives. Additionally, if you'd like to get connected more so to the podcast, you can find our website at realreviewmedia.com. Again, it's realreviewmedia.com. On there, you can get connected to our podcast as well as our vidcast. We have links to all of our different socials and our places that we are streaming this content to. So definitely check that out if you'd love to get connected. And if you're checking us out on YouTube or one of the other streaming platforms, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and you'll be notified whenever we have new content that's going to be released. All that said, thanks for checking us out, and it's been real.